And welcome now to the 2024 October Food Systems Lecture by Pam Warhurst. Pam Warhurst is a community leader, activist, environment worker, and founder of the voluntary gardening initiative Incredible Edible in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. Way! She is involved in local politics and national policy and is currently chair of the Incredible Edible movement. In 2005 New Year's Honours List, Pam was appointed as a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, a CBE, for services to the environment. Great stuff. In addition, Pam has given many lectures all over the world, wrote a book about the Incredible Edible Project, and given a widely viewed TED Talk on the topic. But don't go and look up the TED Talk now. Stay here at Food Thinkers. Do that afterwards. And again, maybe buy Pam's book as well. I'm sure that we'll find an Amazon or other bookseller link and drop it into the chat. That'll, if you want to read more. It's definitely in City Library there for students to read at the moment. So, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Pam. Please, everybody, jazz hands or applaud if we were there in person. Welcome, Pam, to tonight's Food Thinkers.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Christian. I'm in awe at speaking to this audience, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here and have a chance to just tell you a story, because that's what this is all about. I'm just going to tell a story, and it's a story based on a challenge, and I'll talk through slides about what that challenge is, and one that identifies very clearly that we have many, many leaders in our communities who can demonstrate an alternative approach to food, who can demonstrate that they're perfectly prepared to put their shoulder to the wheel and change the way our cities and our towns and our villages look by creating edible landscapes, and who've learned a thing or two about what rules need to change. And that's basically what I'm going to be talking about. But before I do that, I just want to say huge, huge thank you to Tim Lang, because it was Tim that encouraged me 16 years ago to crack off with Incredible Edible. It was Tim that reminded me of the big ticket issues around food and around the planet 16 years ago. And it was Tim that persuaded me to actually get off the seat and get out into the community and do something positive. And going full circle, it was Tim's presentation at your last webinar around the need for us to think about the role of civil society in how we approach the increasingly complex but very doable local food justice problem. So, with no more ado, Seize the Solutions is about we're not victims, we're solution finders in the community, and we have a view on what we need to do about climate change. Let me just share our story. Next slide, please. So it all started, as I've said, 16 years ago in the place I call home, because I'm not going to bore you to death with 16 years of stories, but just to say that if you're going to actually try and create a food movement that can perhaps inspire people, you might as well start in the place that you call home, on the streets that you walked your kids to school on the local railway station where you catch your train to your job, or wherever else it might be. And that happened to be Todmorden, which is in the north of England, and it's between Manchester and Leeds. It's a market town with the usual issues around employment, around local health, around a rather grey environment. And it used to look more or less what the pictures on the left of the screen show you it looking like. You know, it can rain a lot in Todmorden. We are in the north of England. And it turned into somewhere where fruit, vegetables, herbs started popping up all over the place, on our streets, in our community centres, in front of our hospitals, and so on. Because we wanted to remind people that food is something that we together can make a difference about. We wanted to remind people that it's our actions that dictates the type of food economy we might have in our community. And I wanted to remind people that we didn't necessarily need a heck of a lot of money to start growing our own food and sharing it in order to start a conversation that went along the lines of, so how come I can't get access to good quality food in my local shops at a price that I can afford? How come we're starting to run multi-million-pound eat 5 a day campaigns in order for us all to be healthy? And yet we do nothing to actually support our local producers, our local food growers, and we don't have a planning system that supports it either. So in response to all those things in Todmorden 16 years ago, next slide, please. And because I was more than aware of the big problems around the planet, around the use of resources, around this is 16 years ago. You know, I mean, we know a lot more about it now, don't we? And we fed food justice and sovereignty into this equation as well. But these problems are here to stay. And I don't see a right lot of leadership these days around these topics. But I do see an awful lot of report writing and books being written, and all manner of which I think is fine. But I want actions, not words. And that's what we're trying to do with Incredible Edible, to demonstrate what communities can do without a whacking great lottery bid, without PhDs, with all due respect to those that might be on this call, without the need to actually reference new thinking on it, because we know what the problems actually are. So those were the beginnings of Incredible Edible. Next, please. And so I invented a really simple model. How are we going to, in the place we call home, really inspire people to see they are solution finders and part of that solution, and not the victims waiting for somebody else to dole out food at food banks or anywhere else? I am not saying that this is simple, but with the will, we have demonstrated that people can make a huge difference in the places they call home. The 3 spinning plates were simple. If I'm going to have a conversation about the future of the planet and how to nurture my community and how to respect the species of all, the children of all species on this planet, I need to find a language that everybody understands. And quite frankly, everybody understands the language of food. So food is my Trojan horse into helping people think through a different way of living their lives, and at the same time, being healthier, happier, and more connected. So the 3 spinning plates, which were created because, and I always say this, so apologies to anybody that's heard me, when I heard Tim speak in London, I got on a Virgin train and went back to Todmorden and made this whole thing up. I didn't consult on it. I didn't write a report on it. I just thought we need to act now. So what are the 3 things that we might be able to do? Well, the first is, let's plant food in the place we call home. Let's not necessarily ask for permission to do it. Let's just create green, edible landscapes that people walk past day in and day out. And let's see, through that research activity, if you like, what impact that might have on people day in, day out, month in, month out, year in, year out. And it's quite considerable. The second thing is, let's do a realpolitik about this. People don't know how to grow. They're confused about the types of soils they want. They don't know, you know, the difference in seasonality. So let's find people in our communities who we can talk through to, who actually do know how to plant, how to grow tomatoes. And they also know how to make jam. And some of them know how to graft trees. And we've not had to spend a lottery bid on doing that. We've just talked to our neighbours and found out, you know, the most amazing people to grow spuds? Ask a miner. Just those leaders, those learning leaders are in all our communities. We just need to talk to them. And the third aspect of our spinning plates was really straightforward. If we want real traction around this, if we want all our communities to see that they can be part of this solution, there's got to be jobs in it. You know, we've got to create more local markets. We've got to inspire more people into our farming communities. We've got to rethink how we design our urban centres, whether we're using the tops of buildings or the sides of buildings or whatever to grow our food on. There's a job for everybody in this. If we start to really think about the importance of local economies in the whole scenario of creating food justice. This is about sticky money economies where the profit stays at the point of sale. And the more we get of that, the more people support their local markets rather than supermarkets, and the more people ask about where the eggs came from, and the more people want to understand the quality of the soil things are grown on. It just happens because people are interested in food. Next, please. So these are some of the things that happened. Obviously, you know, we created a book called Seeds to Solutions, The Power of Small Actions. And quite frankly, it's really important we underscore the power of small actions, because I'm bored to death with being patted on my back for being a community activist, bless them. But, you know, the real decision-making takes place elsewhere. No, I don't think so. I think we've got a few lessons that we might be able to share with those anchor institutions that make so much of the framework of our lives. But look at what we can do. By planting food in our local communities, we have redefined those spaces to be greener. The bottom middle one is on the Isle of Bute, where they have planted edibles along their seafront to get people talking, signs up there, food for sharing, when it's ready. You know, this is a job for everybody, not just the growers. The creatives have a really important role to play in helping people reposition themselves in terms of the questions they ask about the food that they're eating. We've got a wonderful woman who's part of the Portmaddock group who has built a sustainable house, that top left-hand corner, through bricks, through mud and recycled plastic and the like. And that now is the place that that group hangs out in order to drink their tea on sometimes a rainy day in Portmaddock. We've got people building raised beds in all around housing estates. We've got people in Ulverston growing food in a rather dark corridor, having to think through, well, how am I going to water this? Having to think through what's going to grow in the shade, having to actually work out what works best where. Next, please. And besides changing the spaces and redefining an edible urban realm, we've learned all sorts of things. We've learned who we need to party with. Sometimes we need to party with men in sheds who can make all the raised beds for us. Sometimes we need to party with the local tool library because not everybody's got all the tools that they need. Sometimes we need to go and talk to a local school and find out what they're doing and piggyback on the back of that. There's all manner of things that are going on in our communities around food. And we all need to really find out what they are and use them, because ultimately the skills and the resources are already in many of the communities. We've just not joined the dots so that we can all participate in this community growing. Next, please. And the third thing is it's about local economies as well. It's about getting a job for your kid. It's about when people are producing food, the rest of the community doesn't think that's for people who didn't manage to achieve anything in life. You know, being a producer of food, being a local grower, be a local processor, it's one of the most important things that they could ever do in their lives, and we need to celebrate them. What we found 16 years ago is because we created what we call propaganda gardens, which are the green spaces all over town where we plant vegetables and herbs and we grow fruit and so on and so forth, and we put the signage up there and we offer it up for sharing. Because people walked past that, imagine a child of 4 walking past that 16 years on, that child's 20. That child thinks differently about space and food than if it just went to a supermarket to grab a bag of beans that flew over from Peru, when it would be much better if those beans had stayed in Peru. But basically what we also found was people were going into the markets. We found that people were going to say, where do these eggs come from? And have you got a local small holding? And can I see how your animals are reared? People are starting to get an interest. And we're just an ordinary working class market town. You know, this isn't about the high end of it all. This is about ordinary people being really interested in what they're putting into their mouths. It might be a veg box scheme. It might be a local market stall. It might be, as the 2 bottom ones show, an entire community taking over their local market, because it's really important that we reduce those supply chains. It's really important that we support our local processes, and what better way to do it than a local market? So all these things create the sorts of local economies that could eventually lead to more community farming, to more use of the peri-urban fringe in order to produce more local food. You don't have to make everything up for people. Give them the opportunity to see what they might do, and they will be really innovative and imaginative in finding solutions. Next, please. And this is what it was all about, right? I didn't do this in order that I can grow Brussels sprouts better than anybody else. I did this in order to demonstrate that people have a role on the decision-making, on the type of food that they can access for themselves, their family, and their community. They should have a voice. And what we managed to show, left-hand side of the screen, is that whether it's Incredible Edible or whether it's City Farms or whether it's Sustain or whatever, the many organizations that encourage people to grow food locally, whatever it is, we're the innovators, we're the change makers. We are doing it off our own back, and we have demonstrated we can bring people together, we can improve people's health and well-being. The reports are all there, are they not? And we can actually produce local food and some spin-off local jobs as well. But hey, this needs to be 2 hands clapping. We need to have a system that makes that easier, because it's fine for those of us that maybe know how the system works. But if you've never done anything at all like this in your entire life, and you go to your local council and you say, I've got some rotten land at the bottom of our street and I really want to work hard on it and put some compost in there and start to grow for my community, and their knee-jerk reaction is no, you're not going to go back again. We need to be encouraging our anchors to say yes as a default position, not no. So we need to change the system in some way so that it works both for the anchor institutions, local government, health, housing, whatever, and the people that live within those communities, a kind of prosperity. Next, please. So this was a study done by Open University that picks up some of those points I've alluded to already. The institutional challenges to community growing, and for community growing, read all aspects of interaction with local quality food. Limited land access and knowledge of where the land is. Fragmented council policies, you know, not my job, gov, doesn't have food in my, I do highways, all that type of stuff. Low prioritisation of community growing because it's deemed to be a kind of cute thing that volunteers might want to get on with if they're retired, but anybody else, it's not really a serious proposition for food justice and food sovereignty. I think Tim's presentation last time round kind of like underscored that that's not the way it is. And that disconnect between community growing and wider food policies, such as climate crisis policies. If food and access to food is not at the heart of how we should be responding to this climate crisis, I don't know what is. Next, please. So what we need to do, having had experience of 16 years, is to not put up with the rules that we've got because they are not encouraging more people to become local growers, to think about the importance of where their food comes from, to be advocates and storytellers for a more localized food economy. We're not encouraging those things, so we need to change the rules. Next, please. Because imagine if every neighborhood was Incredible Edible, made, you know, propaganda gardens all over the town, created a conversation and a buzz on the town, shared the skills in their neighborhoods, not just in schools, but throughout the streets and the boroughs and the housing estates, so that those that know how to do it can pass it on to other people. Imagine if we could, all of us, have the opportunity to create local businesses, should we want to do that, to support our local farmers, whatever it might be. Imagine if we were respected and our experience was welcomed by the anchor institutions and the policymakers. And we didn't rely on the goodwill of people in those organisations to crack on and create local supply chains and good local food, but we did it because of right. What would that look like? Next, please. A right to grow. Came up this idea, you know, because there's absolutely oodles of local land paid for by the taxpayer, under the control, on the whole, of local government, could be housing associations, could be health authorities, but on the whole, a lot of it is public realm, under local authority stewardship. We pay for it with our taxes, and yet we have to have grass growing on it or nothing growing on it, as opposed to having the ability to say, I'd quite like to grow food on that. It was interesting when we put this proposition to a London solicitor who spoke to barristers, who wrote us a piece of legislation called the Community Right to Grow on Public Land, which we launched in the House of Lords in 2022 with zero budget, basically, but received cross-party support about why not. This type of change is the type of thing that allows people to get on with nurturing their own communities and not feel that sense of injustice around local food. So we've got a piece of legislation and we've modified that to go into local authorities so that they can adopt a right to grow should they want to do that. And that's what we're campaigning on. Next, please. What it's about. There are some elements around the right to grow that, you know, are core. We need to know the land in the local authority or in the health authority where we can grow food. So we need some sort of maps. We need to talk about what that looks like. It needs to be different from local authority to local authority. But first of all, we need to know where the land is. Then we need councillors or people on boards in these anchor institutions to replace the permissive right with a rights-based approach. Because we've got loads of examples where people cracked on and then they had to stop. Or I can think of some examples where the local authority said no, so the local groups had to grow in wheelbarrows where they had to wheel it all over the place because at least they couldn't stop doing that. If we had a rights-based approach, you can plan for the future. We need uncomplicated free leases. We need councils, etc., to think about, could they cover the insurance for the community groups? Because there's loads of benefits from doing this, and it would actually cost them not a right lot to extend their public liability for grass to public liability for cabbages. And we need authorities to prioritise community growing. And if we do all these things, not only do we get a more localised supply chain, not only do we upskill our communities, but we build trust between citizen and state. And that is one of the most important things that we need to do if we're going to create civil resilience around food. Next, please. These are some of the examples of the maps. You know, a local authority may choose to just share in some sort of open source way some of the data they've got, or they may not. Local, ordinary people can crack on, and there's a wonderful guy in Brighton University, Mikey Tomkin, who shows people how to walk their territories and how to draw their own maps and present those to their council and come to an agreement on where they can and where they can't. But once it's agreed, that's a right. Next, please. Next. I think we've come to a slight halt on this one. I can't even remember what the next slide is, to be quite honest, but there are loads and loads. Oh, here we are. What are the benefits? Lancaster University did a piece of research that showed if we utilise the public realm in England, we could grow 40% of our fruit and veg on it. Now, you know, 40%, is it 39? Is it 41? I tell you, if it was 15 to 20, we have a heck of a lot more local fruit and vegetables being grown by communities or community organisations. We all know access to fresh food, better health outcomes, better community outcomes, you know, less pressure on the health service. That means a saving in social care and in healthcare. And all we're asking back is this reciprocity around what we will do and what the state will do. Reduce reliance on high carbon food imports, reducing urban heat spots, and creating wildlife corridors. Because of course, people don't go into this by wanting to poison their kids. They don't want to pour a load of horrible stuff on the soil, which they know will then, once they get interested in this, they start to look at it. They'll look at Google. They'll see how they can actually deal with weeds. They'll look at the sort of natural benefits of composting, that type of thing. And all that's really good for wildlife. So you're not only hitting the benefits for people and food, you're hitting the benefits on improving biodiversity. And all you're doing is growing vegetables, fruit, and herbs. Next, please. Just to reiterate why. Permission can change. It can change because of political persuasion. It can change for all manner of reasons. But rights future-proofs community growing. And what we need to do is to test how we can future-proof community growing through a rights-based approach. It also takes away bureaucracy. It makes it easier for everybody to understand what their role is and their responsibilities, because it's not just about rights, it's about responsibilities. And if we manage to demonstrate this in enough places, which we are, then local policies might lead to national policy change. We didn't get anywhere with trying to change the Levelling Up Bill in Parliament. We didn't really expect to be quite honest, but we raised the profile. We got in Hansard. Ordinary people actually made their voice heard, and across the parties, there was support. But what I want to see is I want city regions to be adopting this. I want, you know, Liverpool and London and Bristol and Hull and everybody else to be saying, let's work out how we can make this work, because that's the key. If you've got the will to move towards the right to grow, you will find the solutions at a local level. That's our experience of 16 years of Incredible Edible. Next, please. And when we did launch it, all these people said, can we put our name to that? And there's many more beside that. That's just a quick snapshot of those people that wanted to help us. Talking to the Town and Country Planning Association, how do we change the planning regime in order that we can create edible landscapes in the heart of our communities so that people see what food's all about and cannot be persuaded by people who wish to sell you things that aren't necessarily doing you any good, that that's what they want to do. So planning, really important. How do we actually work with Bristol Good Food Guide or the Sheffield Food Partnership or others to test out how we create this right to grow? Because it is a concept of its time. And it is one that there is such a buzz around with community growers and with policymakers that one has a sense that this is the right moment to do this. When we moved it in the first instance, we worked with Hull in order that they could get a whole citywide adoption of a right to grow motion, which they did. That was followed by Runnymede, who also moved a motion of testing out how you adopt a right to grow. We know communities in Liverpool are very interested and are talking to their councillors. The same in Leeds, the same in Manchester, the same in Newcastle. All over the place, people are talking to each other about how they can work. And that's why we've created a right to grow knowledge exchange platform, because we know this is a really simple piece of a jigsaw in this whole issue around civil resilience in changing times and how we can tackle food justice. We're just one piece of that jigsaw, but it's an important piece of the jigsaw with a lot of experience behind it. The knowledge exchange allows us to go on platforms and say, so that the people in Hull can tell the people in Liverpool how it's worked for them and what hasn't worked for them. So the people in Runnymede can have a chat with the people in Lambeth about, you know, different types of communities, but where do we share some great ideas about how we can make this work? We've got a national knowledge exchange network. We're developing a London-wide one because we want London to be a major city of the C40 who have adopted a right to grow. So we're working with Lambeth, with Hackney, with Southwark, and with, no, I always say, I can't remember the fourth one, forgive me, in order to demonstrate what we might do. So that's what we're about, demonstrating how a right to grow on community land is part of the solution for the civil resilience that Tim was talking about. We are working in the north with Sheffield University to look at Liverpool, Leeds, Sheffield and Hull to create a coast-to-coast corridor of what a right to grow might mean. What does it mean for us to adopt it in those city regions, and how can we then make it normal across that northern corridor? And we want it to happen across the country. So next slide, please. If anybody's interested in this, and I hope you are, because it really is a very positive thing that we're engaged in. It's a great conversation that inspires a lot of people to want to get involved, particularly young people, particularly people who want to invest in hope. If anybody's interested in doing that, we have a Right to Grow page on the incredibleedible.org.uk website. We're interested in working with other academic institutions that may be interested in helping us. We're interested in working with community groups who are either on this road already or want to expand it and want to share more of their knowledge. We're all in this together. There's not a master plan in a bottom drawer somewhere, but there is a route map, and it's called a right to grow on public land. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Wow, Pam, that was amazing. Thank you. I'm going to give jazz hands because I know if I clap loudly, everybody with headphones is not going to be appreciative. But I think everybody is probably going to put excellent applause and things like that in the chat. But please also put your questions and answers into the question and answer box. We have some, well, about 5, 7, 8. Wow, the question and answers is exploding now, and I'm going to have to do my job to triage it now. An amazing and powerful talk, giving some really good insights onto the scale that it's moving, and it's from very small seeds, as you've highlighted. It's going to be an amazing thing within such a short space of time. I can remember back in 2014 when I first heard about Incredible Edible, I was just blown away by what was happening in Todmorden and across the entire network. So again, I've been nervous coming to introduce you here today, that's for sure, to introduce you to this. So we are at the Centre for Food Policy. can I ask you, what is the main policy action we need to do to expand this rights to grow approach, to expand Incredible Edible? What are the policy things we need to do, the policy options that we need to start doing as different government departments to actually get the right to grow working? You started hinting at that, but I'm going to say you have big sucker punches that you want to state on the record. These are the things we've got to get going.
You need to look at the planning system. The planning system mitigates against greening up inedible landscapes. You know, we've got an opportunity. The government talked about garden villages. We're talking, but you know, we've got a problem in that we're not taking food seriously. So the first thing to do is let's revisit the planning system. Let's put people into that conversation of what they want in their local areas. And let's make sure we have room for edible landscapes. Because through edible landscapes, we can enhance biodiversity. We can use biodiversity net gain. There's all manner of things. And there's some great examples. If we go back to the Garden City movement and the work of the Town and Country Planning Association, it makes sense to put food and edible landscapes at the heart of where people live. That's the first thing. The second thing is we really need to take this seriously in our schools. You know, it's brilliant, the stuff that goes on in primary schools, but it all fades away a little bit when it gets to secondary. It's something that's done in lunchtime if there's a member of staff who's keen on it, or after school or whatever. You can teach every STEAM subject through the food lens. And if you do that, you are taking people over a period of time and it will change their perspective of place, of job, of whatever. So do that. Health, please, please, please. What is the point of building hospitals that are surrounded by things that you can't eat when you run 5-a-day campaigns? What is the point of that? So you might as well have a policy relating to health estate that is an exemplar of engagement with communities around food. Those are three things. You could go on every single element, and every single department needs to have a food strand right in it, and then that needs to be braided across a holistic approach to people's well-being and planetary well-being. It's not rocket science. It just requires the will to see that there's a gun to our temples and we need to do things differently.
Thank you for that, Pam. And I could just talk backwards and forwards with you for ages on this. We had this amazing discussion about how schools and universities can be part of the food system to change it. Exactly as you've highlighted, it can be integrated into curriculum. It can be growing food on the school site, lots of different things. I'm sure lots from the Centre for Food Policy would love to talk more on that. I'm going to instead go, we've now got 11 questions in the chat already, and I'm trying to group them as best as I can. So there's one here about learning and about knowledge exchange between different bits of Incredible Edible, which I thought would be a useful one to start off with, because you were saying you've learnt over this time. So could you just give a little bit more detail about this? So Cheryl Sullivan asks, how do the partners in Incredible Edible in the knowledge exchange actually interact? Is there a best practice or learning that you can give on that? I'm paraphrasing there now, but
yes,
you want to give a little bit more information on that?
Yes. Okay. It's just to say before I start, everything about us is as basic as you can get, because we have no central funding. We have no office. We've not got loads of staff. We've got people like me who are just passionate about it and just think that the world, needs to see itself in a different framework. So what we do is every other month at the moment, if you go on to an Incredible Edible website, you will see that there will be a webinar. Tim's done one, or is Tim doing the next one? I can't remember. But basically, we have somebody who stimulates the conversation. And then it's open up to the people who have put their name, which is on the whole, hey ho, how did you manage this? And hey, Runnymede, wasn't there a problem about doing something like this? So it's community talking to community, it's policy talking to policy, it's politician talking to politician in a very conversational way. And then the connections are made behind the scenes, because there's some big ticket issues. On the whole, the ticket issues are around, I don't know where the land is. They're always asking me too much money for my lease in order to do it. I don't want to go on an allotment list, thank you very much, because it's very, very long and I'll never get on it. And I can't afford the insurance. So then it comes back to, well, actually, it's really interesting because this council here already covers all your insurance. Whereas this council here makes you actually pay through the nose for it. So these are examples that build confidence as well as knowledge. And I do think it's that confidence building, because I don't believe for a second there's a council somewhere that wants to make sure that its citizens aren't properly fed and that they don't have, sorted supply chains, etc. So that's the national one, which is every other month. If you watch this space, by early next year, we will have a London-wide one, because we're working in partnership with Sustain. And those are the Barnet is the fourth, Barnet, forgive me. So working across those 4 boroughs, we will be looking at what do communities think, how can we actually solve these problems, because for far too long, there's been a sense in those people that perhaps don't live and breathe this all their life, that they can't ask staff questions, or they'll feel ridiculous, or this, no, not at all. So this is a network. This is a movement for everybody. If you eat, you're in. And this is a network exchange for everybody. So it's about, please have a look when the next one is, and just join us.
Brilliant. And hopefully we make sure we schedule the food thinkers at a different time to your own webinars. But definitely that's an amazing thing. And I will be looking into the resource. Are they recorded? Are they online?
Yes, they are.
Okay, well, they'll become must watch for me then. So you mentioned on the webinars that different problems are discussed, and there's a set of 3 questions around some of these problems, and you talked about one of them in your answer there. Do you mind if we just go through these 3 quickly, as it were?
Please go on.
So Rosalie is asking, urban councils restrict urban farming in the guise of protected and undesignated land. How do we talk about getting them to move to a rights-based approach rather than a permissions approach in different sorts of councils? 1.
Yeah.
2, Thomas is asking, I live somewhere where there's many people who are in the minority, but it's an appreciable minority, would not respect edible things grown in an edible space. It would be stolen, it would be vandalized. What are the solutions we can give to that? And then 3, Sarah's asking, it's very difficult to find out who owns the land. Is there a way within these different councils that we can find and identify these easier spaces? Again, so these are running problems or running issues. Any thoughts on those before we move to more policy related discussions? But I thought I'll group these 3 questions because they are about operationals, and you may already have come across these answers quite
well. Yeah, and it's the type of thing that you go to a webinar and say, so who, first of all, is anybody on this webinar from my part of the world, and how have you dealt with these things? Because others may have already had some experience of that. Or you may just want to exchange, how did you do it with your community or with your council? I mean, the bottom line of it all is, Incredible Edible has created a story around Right to Grow, and through huge amounts of serendipity, we end up in the press and people talk about us and there's bits on the telly and whatever else it might be. So what I'm saying is some councillors on most councils will have heard of what we're talking about. The second thing is, we do have a needs and wants document we can send out. Sustain could send it out, you could send it out, which is, you can't afford your healthcare, you can't afford your social care, you haven't got enough people on community development. What's your problem with repurposing public realm in order to be able to tackle some of those things? Can we talk about it? Okay, so this isn't suddenly people waking up with this altruism, oh my Lord, I never thought. This is about how we rebalance budgets for the betterment of people and planet around food. So I think there are loads of, there's actually a book here called Seeds to Solutions, which was written, which people can get hold of, should they want to do that, which just gives you an example. What did Glasgow do? What did Leicester do? What did Brighton do? What did the Isle of Man do? These are examples, and people are good, and councillors aren't there to stop you doing things. So basically, if you can share that experience, or get in contact with Incredible Edible, and we'll give you some advice on how to actually do it. That's one thing. The second thing is, for sure, you've got to think about where you're going to do this, right? You're not going to do it in somewhere where there's packs of dogs all over the place as your first port of call, because you need to win people's support for it. So you work out where you're actually going to put your propaganda gardens in very public places with beautiful signage around it. And you've already worked out how you're going to water it, because you wouldn't bother putting it somewhere where there's no water. You've worked out all that. and you've celebrated it. And people police it. You know, if your community creates it, there's only so many times somebody's going to break a beanpole. And quite frankly, 9 times out of 10, they don't break a beanpole. We planted in the middle of Todmorden, which is a typical working class town, beans all over the place. We planted in front of the college. We planted in front of the health centre. We planted all over. And we thought, well, you know, it's not the Taj Mahal. If somebody destroys this, we'll just plant more stuff. And that ultimately is the solution. But funnily enough, they may still pull the heads off daffodils in the park, but they do not break beanpoles. So on the whole, people, there is an inbuilt, I think, in most people, with most people, to respect food. And if it's nicely signed and it's about the people, not about authority, there's a different approach. People are more respectful. So, of course, there are some no-go areas, but they're not where you think they are, and they're not half as big as you think they are. So that would be another thing. Let's have a conversation about how that works. And I cannot even remember the third point.
So the third one was just in terms of how do you identify who owns the land?
Right, okay.
Centralized database?
Well, there's 2 rules that I always have, which is work with the willing and the able, and work with the tools you've got. So right. I'm quite sure you'll start by looking at where the public land is.
Great.
You know, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to knock on some doors and somebody's got some private land that they can let you grow, and that's fine. But your public realm will be on a map. It'll be in your neighbourhood plan. You can talk to your local councillor about where it is. They will tell you where that public land is. It'll be in verges. We plant on verges, not on the busiest roads, but there's oodles of verges all over the place. We plant around disused playing fields. We plant around, you know, we do plant in front of some public buildings, but you'll find there's an awful lot of land. So the first thing is start with public land. We would love the Crown Estate to put their land in it. We would adore if churches put their land into this edible food bank. It would be fantastic if the NHS made a statement around that. But the more of us that have confidence about telling our stories, about the edible landscapes we've created and the benefits we've created, the more those barriers fall down and the more people offer up the land in order that people can benefit from it. Because the last point is, local authorities have been so denuded of resource, they can't even afford to mow the stuff. So if you come up with a good plan for feeding your local community, street, neighbourhood, they're more likely to listen than in the days when they were awash with money.
Definitely. And I just love the idea of propaganda gardens. So picking your battles and figuring out what is the space that you're going to make the most beautiful and put all your resources in. That is one for community buy-in. And obviously the watering instance happened to you guys, otherwise, because you were able to know about it right now. So there's obviously a tale there for another time. Can I change gear and move to kind of the higher level policy idea of the right to grow? So a little bit more academic, but just thinking of this. So Tim Lang's asked a few questions and some others have asked questions as well about right to grow. So just changing gear to that. Are you ready for it?
Well, I'll try.
Oh, we'll try. So firstly, Jennifer Lyons has put 3 questions in the chat, so in the Q&A, saying A, community gardens in Ireland have now been enshrined in law, whoop, whoop. And that's great. I think that's great that community gardens are there. She was just highlighting that right to grow is the way forward. Belfast has right to grow. The Republic of Ireland is hot on its heels. It seems the island of Ireland is punching, you know, it's firing on all cylinders. But, and this is the point she makes, it's Irish planning and development allows community gardens now, but it's not yet a right to grow. So what are the next steps for Ireland in this in terms of they've come this far? And what are the other policy, she uses the word policy instruments, but what are the other things that either municipal, national need to do for a right to grow in Ireland maybe or wider? Is there anything specifically that you can think in terms of that? So you're saying we need to go, councils need to adopt the right to grow. Is there anything specific besides enshrining in law the right to community gardens? What are the other big things we need to be enshrining?
Well, we need to be enshrining investment in communities' ability to share their knowledge, to do their own knowledge exchange. We need to think about the things we've been doing around, say, citizens' juries or whatever in a localized place. Because I can speculate about the Republic and I can speculate about Northern Ireland, but it's Northern Ireland and the people in the Republic that have got the solutions to those things. It's a brilliant first step, but the question would be, how much more could we do if we actually had access to public land? And that's got to be a bit of an academic exercise, I would have thought, to actually look at it. There are metrics around how much tonnage you could get out of it and so on and so forth. There are possibilities, and it's storytelling all the time. You know, imagine if we actually had more community farms, as well as community gardens in the middle of our urban centres, a peri-urban fringe of community farming, you know, as the next stage. So it's about land use. We need a land use strategy that allocates land for edibles without a shadow of a doubt. But increasingly, it's this. So I wouldn't presume to tell Belfast how to do this. But I think it's very obvious that there is an appetite for it, that politicians are looking for things that communities can do because they can't afford to do it, that politicians are also looking at how do we bring hope back into our communities. All this is the story that we need to tell. And then we need to find the willing and the able in those institutions and back them with those stories and that evidence.
So this leads cunningly on to the next question. I was hoping you would answer like that, which is from Tim Lang. You know, you reference him. He's on the line now. We'll wave to Tim. So his first question is, where are you finding opposition to Right to Grow then? If all of these things are positive, if council leaders are going for it, who's saying no?
Yeah, right. We do have a bit of a clash, do we not? Because in the one hand, this is why we need a land use strategy. On the one hand, we know that we need more land to grow food on. And on the other hand, councils are very nervous because they're going to build houses on it. Right? So there are other pressures on land, housing, energy, whatever it might be. Which is why, at a local level, it may work or it may not. It's for those people in that city region or whatever to decide, do meanwhile licenses work or don't they? If we could have a license for 5 years to grow on that land and then have a rolling programme of understanding that new land to replace that would be found, that would be quite interesting. But again, it's about people talking to people. And it's back to that point I make about trust and understanding. If this establishes trust and understanding in the dialogue between citizen and state, we are more likely to find more localised solutions to how to produce food and where to produce it. So there are clashes along the way with housing. And so the answer to that is, well, why are we building sheds that do not have the means to grow in their immediate vicinity? This is a planning issue. And sadly, there is still, with this current government, too much interest in thinking in a monoculture way, if you want to put it that way. It's housing and that's food. Well, no, they can be both the same thing. And the Garden City movement would be a great example of how that works. So there are pressures on land, absolutely. But if the public realm we've got could produce 40%, then half of that public realm theoretically produce 20%. You see what I'm saying? So let's start with the possible. Let's do the work on the possible. And then let's look at what else we're going to need in order to be able to make those local food connections, those local supply chains, and that reskilling of the local community.
That's a really useful answer. And I think there are 3 questions that I now need to kind of go to, and I'm not sure which order to go to them because they all bounce off exactly what you've just said. So Tim has asked us his follow-up to that. Has the Labour government been in contact, or is this a priority for the Labour government, do you feel? Is there any interest? Just because DEFRA Secretary of State Steve Reed has said that food security is one of his top 5. We know he's talking to different people. Has there been any murmurings, if you're allowed to say, this small intimate group of 60, 70, 80 people online? Do you see anything from the priorities of government towards this, or not yet?
It's early days and I shall be a little tactful.
That's fine.
But if I was to say not a sausage, you'd be fairly close to it, wouldn't you? So it seems to me that there is a particular element within Labour that may be particularly interested about this, which is the cooperative party, about mutuality, about thinking about people's role in finding solutions. Now, at the moment, they've got national government's got a lot of fish to fry, if I can put a fish type term in there. But no. And if any door was open for a conversation around, well, I mean, we argued it was a simple levelling up operation. with the last government. We argued that Levelling Up did a load of things around governance and absolutely nothing directly related to communities and what they can do. We're still in that situation.
And there's not a new narrative that has emerged from the Labour
government. There's not a new narrative yet around it. And yet, I do think Leeds is interested, Liverpool is interested, Manchester is starting to get interested. So the politicians at a regional level that are perhaps closer to a problem are starting to focus on this, starting to focus on it. But what we need is for everybody to see this isn't a high-cost operation. Opening up people's ability to feed themselves and repurpose land shouldn't cost anybody anything, and in fact will save the nation money. So if we can get those messages out there more effectively, then just let me know and I'll do it.
No, brilliant. And I guess this leads on to you'd mentioned the grey peri-urban areas in terms of priorities for housing, so grey land rather than new land. In your experience, has there been tension in Incredible Edibles so far around housing development? And then a secondary question has come in from Brigida, talking about the tension between open traditional farming practices and what you're doing here. Has Incredible Edible been applied in rural settings, and has it worked in that way? So is there a rural Incredible Edible, or is it need to be within the communities of urban peri-urban, and does that mean there is a housing or food tension?
So just to answer the first one,
sorry for throwing two at you at once.
No, but I'll probably forget the second one because I'm an old woman, so just bear with me on that one. So on the first one, we've got 150, 160, 170 communities in the UK. And there's lots of groups all over the world doing this. And we're really interested in alternative global policy perspectives, which is why we've got a round table, believe it or not, at the C40, talking about right to grow and who's already doing it in Rio or wherever else it might be. Anyway, parking that. Yes, of course. What's making councils nervous? What's stopping Glasgow saying thumbs up to what's happening in their part of the world, although they're interested in food and food policy, why they're not going the full hog, is because there is this tension, and we need to put all our efforts in supporting local councillors to say there shouldn't be a tension. If you are building new homes, you have to allow people to be able to feed themselves and enhance their natural environment in the process. So stop putting up sheds, permitted development and all that type of stuff, and start thinking about people and planet. But yes, there are lots of examples, and we could talk about that off screen. In terms of the rural stuff, the bottom line is it's about people. Rural, urban. Not to be overly simplistic, but it's a sparsity thing, and it's and it's a lot. People are still people, and we are finding people in rural England in particular, but also in Wales, who are disconnected from food. Not everybody's a farmer that lives in rural areas. There are many communities that are still disconnected with food, that are still forced to the supermarket to get what's cheap and cheerful, that have no real skills being taught in their schools about how they can actually do things, who haven't got allocated land in order that they can be encouraged to grow on it. It's not just an urban point. Now, in fairness, I would say that I have spoken at many, many places, and there are certain parts of the country where I stand up and bang on about Incredible Edible and right to grow. And if I was being unkind, I would say the response is, but Waitrose do that, which is not quite the message that I'm trying to deliver. So in some of the better heeled places, it doesn't necessarily get the traction that it might. But nevertheless, across the country, it's just about people who are concerned about their future, their kids' future, their neighbourhood's future, how they're going to put good food on the planet, on the table, and not destroy the planet. This is just a piece of the jigsaw they can put into place and say, well, I started here.
That's a really good way to summarize. I guess to bounce off that idea, there's two in the chat here in terms of, you've highlighted it's about people. There is a tension around housing. So Sam was wanting to ask the question about the government's new ambition to build houses on the grey belt is impacting your vision. You've just highlighted that. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it is, but it doesn't have to. The horse hasn't bolted on that one. There are some really very good arguments being put through by Town and Country Planning Association and others about how we can have a win-win here.
Yes.
On housing. And the other thing is, we're talking about food. We're talking about skill sets of the future. You know, there are cities across the world where 40% of the rooftops are growing food on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are people growing edibles up walls, all manner of things. There's all sorts of things that we can do when it comes to growing food locally. It's about planning, it's about design, it's about architects. It's just about bringing professionals together and saying, in a climate crisis, do you want to put your shoulder to this wheel and help people feed themselves? What's
Yep.
your bit of the jigsaw? And then they'll come up with the answer. And I'm a big fan of landscape designers, to be absolutely honest, because some of them have been very brave and haven't had the credit that they're entitled to.
So does that mean, so Tim pointed this out in the chat, around one of the other policies then in play is the English National Planning Policy Framework. So about thinking about how we make our housing better, how we make a better housing stock. It's then about the land use, or we're actually getting a land use policy out there, which has still not really been published. And then is it also about our net zero commitment and tying this all into net zero and the strategies there? So it's hitting on every single beat. We need to include this right to grow narrative in that. Is that?
Well, it's going back to that thing, isn't it? At the beginning, food cuts across a lot.
It does.
And what we're arguing is there's not enough people in positions of authority that are really grasping this nettle, which is why we at the grassroots are working collaboratively and collectively to demonstrate that we would support any politician, any anchor institution, any health authority that was brave enough to say, food will make a big difference to the future of my organisation and the future of my community. So therefore, I'm going to change my budgetary priorities. I'm going to look at the policies on my estates. I'm going to look at the procurement policies that I adopt. All these things come together in order that creates the critical mass that helps people say yes to a right to grow, because they can see the interest across the spectrum of the different sectors that good food can impact on.
Really well summarized. I'm probably going to be using that as a clip in class later on when we talk about policy coherence. That was really well put. Thank you, Pam. We have a final thing here, which was responding to your talk around landscape design. And it's just highlighting, I guess, or giving you a chance to highlight, it's not just about putting into soil with the right to grow. It's about raised beds. It's about the ways that feel. So Katkar is highlighting there's different ways that feel less radical so it doesn't have to be into soil. It doesn't have to be in toxic land. It can be raised beds, wheelbarrows, etc.
Yep. So just to say that, you know, going back to the point, we don't go around trying to poison our communities. So and we haven't all got the type of equipment that can test the soil. So if we think there's anything dicky about the soil at all, we do a raised bed. We talk to somebody about, can we use your compost, or we get somebody's soil or whatever it might be, because people can come together and we build the raised beds. But it's also, we ran a program some years ago where we helped people understand hydroponics and understand aquaponics, as well as the soil-based culture. So, you know, the crazy thing is that people talk about communities as if they're people waiting for things to be done. There's so much leadership. There's so many skills. There's so many people who have got all the kind of like professional experience that you would ever need to make this civil resilience real. We need to invest in them and respect them, and then bring them together to create that critical mass. It's already there. It's only national government that seems to think that everything needs to be done to us and that we ourselves can't produce better results. Well, actually, in partnership, citizen and state, we can optimize the effectiveness of the food system that impacts on everybody's lives.
You've just mentioned national government there. Have you found more success with the devolved nations at all?
Wales is very interesting. I'm feeling very upbeat about Wales. But we've not done a lot in Ireland, other than tell our stories. And Clockmill actually in the north was one of the very first incredible edibles, which was fantastic. And we've not done an awful lot in Scotland. Just to reiterate, we're a bunch of volunteers.
But you also have a massive global cut through as well. You've highlighted that this is a network that is now global and has seats at C40 and things like that. So it's obviously a narrative that is working and is cutting through. But
it is. Yeah, we've talked to people in New Zealand. I've done visits to New Zealand, in Australia, interested about how to bring this into legislation in Scandinavia again. So I think it's just the time for communities across the globe to share their experience as climates change, as weather changes, as food systems change, in order that we can demonstrate that if people just move the obstacles out of the way and put the policy and funding frameworks in place, then we have a role to play. That's all I will say. We have a role to play, and repurposing public land in this country should be the first major exercise of intent by the powers that be. If they're really serious about civil resilience and food justice, repurpose the land people pay their taxes for food and nature, and then work out with your communities what the detail of that looks like. It's not beyond the wit of man. And please stop highways authorities saying no, because it drives me bonkers in a climate crisis. But anyway, it's by the way.
No. And again, I think there are different appetites in different departments for this, definitely, in terms of not realizing we're in a climate crisis, etc. Just to finish up, because I know we're running short on time, there's some amazing questions coming into the chat, but just to finish off, two different people, one is tuned in from France and one is tuned in from Zimbabwe, both asking, how do we engage with the Edible Network? What is there an email, a website? What's the first steps that we should be doing here to get in contact with Incredible Edible? Just if you could say that again, so that way people have it for future reference.
Yes, of course. And fantastic. There is actually groups in France. So if you get in contact with us, we can get in contact with you. And Zimbabwe, totally fantastic. You will have so much to teach us. It's Incredible Edible, all one word, lowercase, .org.uk. Look on the website, click on the Right to Grow, tell your stories with us. You know, we're all part of a learning network. We haven't got all the solutions, but we're just determined not to shut up till we get what's needed for people and food justice.
That is brilliant. And thank you again for introducing this very unique take on food justice of Right to Grow and pushing that narrative out there, and all the work you have done over this last time. Elaine has now put incredibleedible.org.uk into the chat. Please, for everybody who is wanting to further contact Pam and the Incredible Edible Network, please do reach out to that. I'm going to probably, we also have someone from Malawi on the call. So we have an international audience here today who all have been inspired by there. I think we've covered, or I've tried to cover 90% of the questions there. So thank you very much, Pam. Again, this has been really inspiring for me to have the discussion with you today. I might just draw it to a close there, because I feel a lot of the things that have been asked or are currently being asked are repetitions of what we've highlighted in terms of land reform, housing policy needs to be aligned, climate policy, and getting, it seems, national policy is what's not available. Any last thoughts from you, Pam, before we wrap up?
No, I just think it's a huge opportunity. I just want to say, to bring research, policymakers and grassroots together in a conversation like this is a huge opportunity. So thank you very much indeed. And it's a joy. And please do get in contact with me. I love talking to people about this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And again, it's just amazing. Thank you again for all your work. Thank you for talking this evening. It is amazing what Incredible Edible have been doing. So that's this month's Food Thinkers. Hopefully see all of you next month. It has been absolutely lovely. And again, let us jazz hand and applaud. Pam, thank you so much for tonight.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.